Hey, good morning, guys. Today we're going to talk about the Krebs cycle. So, the Krebs cycle, one thing to note about it is glycolysis occurs prior to the Krebs cycle. When glycolysis occurs, it happens outside of the organelle mitochondria, and it occurs in the cytoplasm. So, this section that you see right here is happening right outside of the mitochondria. As we recall, glucose entered the cell and it was broken down into two pyruvic acid. These pyruvic acid, they're going to lose a carbon group, and one of those and that carbon that they lose is going to become carbon dioxide. As they journey into the mitochondria, NADH is going to be formed. This NADH goes to the electron transport chain. Pyruvic acid eventually combines with coenzyme A to form acetyl-CoA. So now that we're at acetyl-CoA enters the mitochondria through the pores of the mitochondria membrane, and once it does enter, it's going to combine with this four-carbon compound. When they combine together, they form citric acid. This is a reason that you'll sometimes see the Krebs cycle referred to as the citric acid cycle. As the Krebs cycle is continuing, you will notice that the citric acid starts off as a six carbon compound, and little by little they will lose one carbon group. Those carbon groups they form carbon dioxide and they leave the organelle. This is the carbon dioxide you exhale. Through the process of the Krebs cycle, you also see you have products being formed: NADH, ATP, and FADH2. Eventually, the six carbon citric acid becomes a four carbon compound and it is reused. This reusing of the four carbon compound makes the process of the Krebs cycle efficient because nothing is wasted. NADH and FADH2, these are both electron carriers and they have a high energy state. These high energy states, we're going to see these electron carriers come back to us in the electron transport chain. ATP, it also has a high energy state. However, this is what we use. We use it in processes such as DNA synthesis, muscular contractions, blinking, breathing, basic living processes such as taking notes during this video. So the electron transport chain, it uses these high energy electrons from the Krebs cycle to convert ADP into ATP. So most of the ATP produced from breaking down the glucose is made by electron transport chain. Yes, we do get ATP production in glycolysis. We get it in the Krebs cycle, but the majority of your ATP is going to come from the electron transport chain, and this occurs in the membrane of the mitochondria. And in case you forgot, this definitely requires the presence of oxygen. We're going to see why that oxygen is so important. It hasn't had a purpose yet, but it will in the electron transport chain. So, to begin, we have that NADH and that FADH2, these are our electron carriers. They're bringing in their highly charged states. And if you recall what this white arrow is, this is the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is going to, as it says, this is the pathway for the electron to travel through the membrane of the mitochondria. As it is traveling through, it allows the passage of these hydrogen ions from the matrix, which is between the outer membrane of the mitochondria and the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So it allows this hydrogen to go inside. As it starts building in concentration on the inside of the mitochondria, there's a slightly negative charge on the outside. So what happens is these hydrogen ions are going to pass through the inner membrane through the use of an ATP synthase. And as they keep pumping through, the ATP synthase is going to rotate. As it's rotating, it's going to combine ADP with a phosphate. So now you have ATP production. These electrons, besides allowing the passage of hydrogen ions through the inner membrane, at the end of their process, they're going to combine with 4 hydrogen ions to form water. Oxygen is important because it acts as the final electron acceptor. It is what draws all the processes to occur. If this oxygen was not present, the electrons would not be drawn to the inner membrane of the mitochondria, NADH and FADH2. They would have their high energy states. However, they would have no purpose. They would not be drawn into anything. So again, as we just said, the electrons flow from NADH and FADH2. Our hydrogen ions, our protons, are pumped into the membrane, into the intermembrane space, and a product of this is going to be ATP. So, to review, oxygen is needed to pull electrons through the electron transport chain, and it combines hydrogen ions with oxygen to form water. The electron transport chain, it produces more ATP than glycolysis alone, and in order to produce maximum yield of ATP, you need to have oxygen and pyruvic acid. So glycolysis, it's only going to produce 2 ATP molecules per glucose. And through the entire process of cellular respiration, which includes glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain, you're going to get a yield of about 36 to 38 ATP. Here's the formulas comparing photosynthesis and cellular respiration. If the top one looks a little familiar to you, it should. This is our photosynthesis formula. 6 carbon dioxide, 6 H2O, makes a product of C6H12O6 plus 6O2. In other words, carbon dioxide plus water, with a little bit of sunlight here, sunlight energy, is going to make glucose and oxygen. Remember, this is photosynthesis. Now, these products, we're going to use them in cellular respiration. So this is the beginning of our process. We have the oxygen and glucose, and as a process, or as a byproduct, we're going to have energy produced. Also, we're going to produce carbon dioxide and water. And as you can see, it all connects. So on a global level, guys, you really want to think about it. Why is this all important? Why does this even matter? Well, as many of you guys already know, photosynthesis and cellular respiration, they're opposites. So photosynthesis removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and cellular respiration puts it back into the atmosphere. So why is oxygen required for the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain? I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to really think about it. Feel free to pause the video and try to answer it yourself. This is always a great review for you. So the presence of oxygen is required because oxygen acts as the final electron acceptor. In the Krebs cycle, NADH and FADH2 are created, and these are highly charged states that they're in now. So the oxygen in the electron transport chain draws the electrons to it. It ultimately generates high amounts of ATP. The generation of ATP occurs because as the electrons are flowing into the electron transport chain, hydrogen ions are entering the inner mitochondria space, causing it to be positively charged. The outside, which was the matrix, is negatively charged. The hydrogen ions are exiting through the ATP synthase, causing it to turn, combining with phosphate and ADP. This is a continuous cyclic process, and more ATP is being generated. So now we get to our exit ticket. So during a soccer game, Casey has been sprinting back and forth across the field for about 18 minutes. Her breathing is rapid, and she has begun to slow down. In 2 to 3 sentences, explain why she has slowed down. Think about oxygen, ATP, mitochondria, Krebs cycle, glycolysis, and the electron transport chain. So think about everything that we discussed today in our previous lessons. You can find this exit ticket in your week 11 um, Thursday folder.